be honest, guys, Davante has, for someone who's one of our younger elected officials, like a resume that is very, very long. So I'm going to skip around and try to go through the highlights. Literally, it goes back to high school. Davante doing impressive stuff in politics in high school. So Davante is a Lake Charles native, and I believe a McNeese State University graduate. As a high school student, he served as one of the first members of the Louisiana Legislative Youth Advisory Council and was the vice chair of that group. He also served as President Barack Obama's 2008 campaign Louisiana High School Coordinator. Let's skip forward. While at McNeese, Davante was a two-term student body president, chair of the Louisiana Council of Student Body Presidents, and a member of the University of Louisiana System Board of Supervisors. In his day job, Davante is the Louisiana Budget Project Director of Public Affairs and Outreach, where he focuses on higher education policy, consumer protection policies, monitoring legislative developments, and working with advocacy groups and coalition partners to forge an agenda and action plan for advancing policies that benefit Louisianans. And of course, Davante is our most recent Public Service Commissioner, and he represents this area. This is in your district, right, Davante? Okay. All right, welcome, Mr. Lewis.
Well, thank you, Julie, and thank you all. It is an honor and a privilege, to be with you this afternoon and to speak about utilities and the regulation that we have here in Louisiana. I'm going to start off with kind of what the Public Service Commission actually is and who are we? We're often a very quiet agency, but I would like to say one of the most powerful agencies that you can find not only here in the state of Louisiana, but across the nation. When you think about decisions that are related to climate change, they are largely handled by our commissions across the country. And we are traditionally small, generally around 3 to 5 members that are independent regulatory commissions who oftentimes don't rise to the public awareness unless it is in the context of some hurricane or major blackout like we saw in Texas. But however, when the average American or Louisianian flips on that light switch or breathes the air that they're breathing when they walk out of their house, it is typically a decision that has been made by the Public Service Commission. And less visible, and perhaps most significantly in this era, is the power that the Commission has when it comes to the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere that is influenced by the decisions that we have made. So most commissioners come from a background that have worked in utility regulation. A recent study found that 42% of the commissioners across the country between 1990 and 2020, 42% of them worked in utility regulation. About 33% of them were former elected officials. About 30% of them were gubernatorial and staff appointees or another position appointed by the governor. About 25% of them were utility or fossil fuel industry workers. And then about 19 of them had experience in the environmental field. Only 10% of commissioners did not match any of these categories that I just talked about, and I happen to fit in that 10%. I'm a 31-year-old former public school teacher, union nonprofit worker who now regulates utilities. And that's just not common across the nation. I recently just got back from Austin, where we had our National Association of Utility Regulator Commissioners, and that difference is very stark. I happen to be the youngest commissioner right now in the nation, and one of few black commissioners, as we seem to have a significant diversity problem when it comes to the makeup of our commissions. Louisiana, however, we are an outlier, as we typically are in the way that our commission is developed. We are one of 10 states that actually elects their public service commissioners. The vast majority of states are either appointed by the governor or appointed by the legislature or a combination of both. So to be in a state that is one of the 10 that actually elect commissioners makes up a very different model. So many of you are asking, well, how did you go from public policy to utility regulation? And it's very much one and the same in my eyes. It is the high concentration of poverty in our state and what that actually means. The poverty rate here in Baton Rouge is 90% higher than the U.S. average. And the state household energy use ranks 50th in the nation. When you combine the factor of poverty and the cost of energy in this state, what we are creating is a serious problem, what I like to deem energy poverty. This means as energy bills climb in the summer months, folks right here within a couple of miles of us will make many decisions whether or not they feed their family or they keep their house cool during these hot summer months. I don't think that's an acceptable trade-off. And I think the right way that we should be doing it is looking at how the Public Service Commission can relieve this burden. And this is why I like to call myself the Consumer Advocate Commissioner. And if you talk to some in the industry, I've been nicknamed the Radical Commissioner simply because I believe it should be a human right that your utility bills be affordable, that your air be breathable, and that your water be drinkable. And that I treat utilities as a right and not as a commodity, which our system has developed it to be over time. Now, before I kind of get into where I view this, I just want to set the tone of what it actually means to be a utility commissioner and the choices and the decisions that we have to make. Unlike all of the other commissioners and public regulators across the nation, the authority of the Louisiana Public Service Commission is invested directly in our state's constitution and not via the legislature via statute, which gives us as commissioners undue power because our friends at the Capitol can't dictate or interfere into our business. We do not regulate a utility that is owned or operated by a political subdivision. So if you think about Pineville or Alexandria, Lafayette, they do not fall under the jurisdiction of the Public Service Commission because they were grandfathered into the Constitution of 1921. However, these subdivisions may vote by a vote of their people come within the jurisdiction of the Louisiana Public Service Commission. And what we've seen is we've seen a back and forth. I represent the 3rd District of the Commission, which stretches from West Baton Rouge Parish through Iberville, half of East Baton Rouge Parish, Ascension, Assumption, St. John, St. James, St. Charles, Jefferson, and Orleans Parish. And because in Orleans at the time had their own power to regulate utilities, the city of New Orleans maintains control of regulating their utility. It is the only municipality in the United States that is regulating what we call an investor-owned utility. And what that means is, in this country, the vast majority of our utilities are monopolies. And in exchange for that, we give them the obligation and the responsibility that is known as the regulatory compact. And the compact is simple. It is a public utility has the obligation to provide safe and reliable, unduly discriminatory services to all who can pay at the lowest reasonable cost. In return, that utility receives a monopoly franchise and is guaranteed the opportunity to earn a fair rate of return on the capital that they have prudently invested in that utility. And the key word, which gets to the point that I will make today, is opportunity, not a guarantee. There are no entitled to any specific return and not cost plus. If they are inefficient, engage in imprudent activities, they are not entitled to make up money for their shareholders' earning. But also, we cannot make up if a utility over-earns. I don't have the authority to claw back that money, which means now we have to take a serious look at what the regulatory compact actually means. And so while rates are perspective, they are set to look ahead, they cannot be set to make up under earnings for the previous years. The only way a utility really makes their money is by investing in more capital, because every other expense as we know it is simply just a pass-through business, consumer dollar to dollar. So those investments and returns are paid to the company in tiny bits, known with each kilowatt hour of electricity that they sell. But this is the challenge that I think we face ourselves with in Louisiana. What should those investments be? And have they made prudent investments? And whether or not we should change that. So I talked earlier about the energy cost, but particularly where I've been concerned is what we call the energy burden that people faced. And in this nation, we know for a fact that the costs are going up. Inflation is rising, and there is a need to build more and more. But who should pay for that building? When we think about transmission and connecting to ensure that offshore wind or the growing phenomenon that I'll get to in a second of carbon capture, who fronts the bill? Should it be the shareholders, or should it be us, the ratepayers? And that's the significant question that I believe the Commission must address. Now, Louisiana has the highest per capita residential sector electricity consumption in the United States of America, more than 30% higher than the national average. But we have some of the lowest utility rates in the nation. And so let's break that up for a second. The rate we pay per kilowatt hour, which you will see on your bill, is some of the lowest in the nation. However, your cost of your bill is one of the highest in the nation. And this is due to the lack of weatherization, which means in Louisiana we have a lot of older homes that are not insulated correctly. Their windows are not secure, those doors, meaning they are using more and more energy to keep their house cool or warm in the summer or winter months. We also are not investing significantly enough in energy efficiency to find ways to reduce consumption, which may be using LED light bulbs, looking at heat pumps, HVAC and chilled water, and successful uses. And so what we're seeing is that in Louisiana, 18.9% higher energy burden that residents face in this state than across the nation. When we look at what that actually means to people's pocketbooks, nearly 150,000 Louisianians pay more than 23% of their annual income on their utility bill. When you couple that together with about the 30% that you have to pay for housing and about the 15% that you have to pay for transportation, we are leaving Louisianians with no choice but to live in poverty. But when it comes to this, it is also affect, are we making the right choices? Louisiana is one of few states that have not adopted a renewable portfolio standard that looks at ways to invest and add renewable energy onto our grid, whether that is wind, solar, or battery powered. The Commission has not taken this up. When we look at our usage, 71% of Louisiana's grid is using natural gas. And we know natural gas is a volatile commodity. As the price goes up, so does your utility bill, meaning we're not bringing stability towards that family. When we think about energy that is used, 70% of the energy that is used in the state of Louisiana is used by our industrial users. 66% of all of the carbon that is emitted in this state comes from our industrial users. But are we actually making them pay their fair share to ensure this? When we think about the consumption of energy, 46% of all the energy consumed in the state of Louisiana comes from our industrial users, particularly around my district. I represent what some may call the industrial corridor, or others would call Cancer Alley, where there are more petrochemical and refinery plants and industrial users along this 75-mile radius than anywhere else in the nation. I like to remind people all the time that Shell has 4 petrochemical refinery plants left in the United States of America, and 3 of them reside right here in my district in the 75 miles between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. When we think about what this means for people, we have to think about all that it showcases and how do we protect consumers. And this is the major question that I feel the Commission for a long time has not answered, and we've been asleep at the wheel. We are one of 3 states that has not dedicated a single governmental funded position to be a consumer advocate, to look at energy usage and utility regulation from the eye of a consumer. Every other state, whether it's housed within the commission, some states it's housed within the Attorney General's office, others it's independent, has a person who is examining and looking at all of these. But Louisiana, the second poorest state in the nation, does not have a consumer advocate. And so when we go back to that question about the investments in the regulatory compact, that is why we are struggling. We've heard the significant rise of movement about carbon capture, which I think is an untested, unproven science that is costly. But one of the questions that we have not done our due diligence on is asking who will bear the cost if carbon capture fails. Are we examining this from the position of what happens to the consumer? Because when a nuclear plant fails, or when a natural gas power plant fails, majority of those costs have been put on the ratepayers and the consumers here in the state of Louisiana. And we must be very clear about this. But we also must rise to the occasion to make Louisiana truly be one of the energy leaders that we can be. As electrification becomes the growing phenomenon, and we are seeing coal retirements, and resources with limited capacity such as wind and solar will increase the need to maintain resource adequacy and adding more dispatchable capacity. These days, hundreds of companies are existing without the benefits of a regulatory compact. So they are building power plants, especially energy projects that are by wind and solar, and they are no cost to our ratepayers, which means traditional utilities do not favor them. Part of the reason Louisiana only has 3% renewable energy on our grid is not because there's not significant interest, not because we have not showed to be a leader, but because right now the major utilities would have no way to own it. And if we go back to the conversation that I had earlier, the only way a utility makes money is through investments. And so that's why we must have consumer advocates, because we need to question whether or not the investments that we are seeing now from renewable energy that Entergy is proposing before the commission right now and SWEPCO had before the commission last month are actually cost-friendly to ratepayers, are way beneficial to their shareholders. And this is kind of the tension, I think, that the commission must address. We must look at alternative ways that promote innovation, that promote the new challenges that we can see. I mean, if we think about this, over the last 10 years, $120 billion in mostly gas-fired generators have been used to ensure resource adequacy. But there is a leading, emerging kind of alternative that I like to call a virtual power plant. This is what we like to call distributed energy resources. As we see the rise of solar panels and the rise of batteries, this technology advancement and the incentives that the Inflation Reduction Act is giving us to promote electrification and efficiency that also allows us to decarbonize our society. These virtual power plants can provide the same additional resources to protect us in a hurricane and to prevent a blackout, but at significantly lower the cost than a nuclear power plant or a natural gas power plant that we have come to know. There was a recent study by Brattle that showed the cost-benefit ratio, if let's say we were looking at 400 megawatts, would be that if we did it on gas generation would cost the state $43 million. If we did it on battery power alone, it would cost the state $29 million. But for that same 400 megawatts, if we utilize the virtual power plant, letting us be a part of the energy consumption, selling the energy that we use from our electric vehicle or our solar panels on our home, it would only cost $2 million to build that power plant to supply power to us. So we are talking about somewhere between $15 to $35 million worth of savings in capacity over the next 10 years if we increased renewables, better integrated our system to reduce the load, and faster connected our grid to scale. Now, one of the biggest questions that we face and consumers as a consumer advocate ask is about whether or not we should have retail choice. Whether you should be able to say who your energy provider is. And there's growing concerns about this. I mean, there are questions that we've seen from the states that have what some would call a deregulated system. I like to call a restructured market, where customers have been confused. We've seen higher retail prices and deceptive marketing practices that have been used. But it also brought choice to consumers. And this gets back to the fundamental job of a commissioner, which is to assess the risk. And so in most deregulated states, investor-owned utilities have sold off their electric generation facilities as a part of implementation. However, they have maintained their transmission and distribution to showcase the power that they needed to be. And so we won't see this, and the commission will take up a vote, hopefully, I think, at the end of 2024, whether or not Louisiana joins states that allows individuals the option to choose their power. But to do this effectively and efficiently, it goes back to the theme that I keep harping on, is that commissioners must be consumer advocates. And we must ensure, even when we open up, if we open up for retail choice, our poorest residents, our seniors are protected and not used and abused as we've seen in other retail markets. So to conclude, in the energy world, two things can be true at the same time. That change is slow and change is fast. The commission has historically been a slow body, but it's been changing. But as we see the energy world, the IRA, the investments, the governor's climate action plan that has addressed us being carbon neutral by 2050 is forcing the commission to move. And I think what I am displaying is we're seeing that the old way of doing things just doesn't work, both in the operations of a utility and, to be frank, in the competency of our governmental entities to keep up with the pace of the opportunities and the challenges that demands us to face with. And so over these next 6 years, this is the questions that I've brought to the commission. I am not the traditional commissioner. I am not seeking to keep doing business the way it's been doing. I'm questioning whether or not this regulatory compact is in the best interest of our people. I am questioning whether or not we should allow our consumers to have the choice to choose their utility. I am questioning whether or not we should only use natural gas for our grid. And I am questioning whether or not these investments in carbon capture, in sequestration, or in natural gas generation provides the security for our people's health and their future. The bottom line is this: we can choose to let utilities make the choices for us, or we can stand up as a commission and as a state and start making the choices for ourselves, having a dialogue with them and understanding and negotiating a new way of a regulatory compact that does business, that compensates utilities based off of minimizing their energy use, going to a clean future, protecting their consumers, and not just simply rewarding them for making significant investments that are not prudent and may be costly to our people. But it requires us to do all of this to protect our consumers. And it requires what we now have on the commission for the first time in a long time, a consumer protection majority, where majority of us are asking the questions from the consumer's eyes and not the questions from the utility's eyes. So I will stop there, and I will entertain your questions for the next minutes we have.
So we're going into the peak of hurricane season here soon, and with these extra hot summers we've had, losing power for over a week or a month like we saw after Hurricane Ida would be devastating. What is the role of the PSC working with Entergy and other utilities to make sure that they can rebuild faster after these disasters?
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is something where we have been laxed on. We have what we call the integrated resource planning, which is to look at a utility in about a 10-year span of where they think their investments are going to be made. And I think we need to be stronger. I mean, CLECO has filed their IRP, which I think is woefully under and does not answer significant questions. Entergy has their IRP plan right now. But when it comes to this, the commission can't let the utility drive the conversation. So what we have right now before us in the commission is two dockets, which are our proceedings. One from Entergy, which is a $5 billion proposal of resiliency, how they plan to rebuild their infrastructure. But we also have a docket on the commission of a rulemaking of guidelines and procedures of what it means to build a system that doesn't have people out for 10 days. The challenge that I'm finding is these are on a crash course. And typically what happens at the commission, if a utility files their docket, theirs moves a lot faster than the rulemaking. And so I believe the commission would be a dereliction of our duty to allow us to vote on Entergy's resiliency plan before we actually establish the rules and guidelines of our own policy. Because how can I assess whether or not this plan is good if I have no marker or no benchmark to do? And so this is where I think the commission has to move faster. It has to step up, and it has to change the dynamic of letting the utility drive the conversation. We should be driving what resiliency means, what it means to have an infrastructure that can come back up. I mean, we can look at our other southern state in Florida. When Hurricane Ian hit Florida, not a single transmission line went down. Not a single transmission line went down in Florida. However, and that was a Category 4. The estimates have said if we have a Category 1 storm, we're talking about a week without power. That's not sustainable. And the commission has to do its job to hold the utilities accountable, and that's what I'm hoping to do over the next few months. I think I saw your hand first.
Do you believe that Entergy's ad claim that they're spending $9 billion over 10 years for infrastructure strengthening and improvement should be audited, at least on a semi-annual basis?
Absolutely. I've been calling in my time on the commission, I've called what I believe we need is an independent review monitoring system, especially after hurricanes. We need to ensure, the way it's typically worked is Entergy, our company, has said this is the damage that occurred. We've, in our auditing division and legal and counsel, have looked through and we've said, oh, those are prudent, great. You can recover those costs. I don't believe that's prudency to me. Prudency to me doesn't mean that I assess whether or not that 30-year-old pole fell down or not, because it's very clear in the storm that 30-year-old pole fell down. But prudency to me is if you had a 30-year-old pole that should have been steel in the first place, then you don't get the coverage of a new pole, which is typically what has happened. And so I think what we have to do at the commission is find and really be strong on these independent reviews and on these auditing. And that's what I've started to do. One of the first initiatives that I was able to pass is opening up a docket on political spending, because I want to make sure that our ratepayer dollars aren't being used for that ad you just talked about. Because I think it makes no sense for me to use for a company to use the money that I am paying to put out an ad to tell me what they're doing, and then I have to whether or not assess if that's what they're doing or not. And so I think it is very clear that we have to have a stronger independent process, and we will hopefully have a new rate case from Entergy where we'll be able to dig in the books, and I'm going to be very strong on significant auditing and prudency checks during that case.
Can you speak a little bit on how transitioning to these virtual power plants would be beneficial to the consumer?
Yes, so what this, a virtual power plant would use in multiple functions. So what we can see is that industrial users could buy that renewable energy on their own risk and cost and then power it back to the grid. So what that means is we are adding capacity. We're adding resource capacity. One of the challenges that we are facing, especially with the rise of electrification and going to electric cars and electric goods, is that means we're going to need more power. Because if everything's electric, that means you have to have power. And so what a virtual power plant would do is provide those resources to keep the grid powered without the significant cost of an investment of a new power plant. So when we think about it, it's going to reduce people's bills because they're not going to have to build a new nuclear facility. We're not going to have to build a new gas power plant to match the adequacy that we need to ensure that the lights never flicker in your home. But it also gives consumers a way to be a part of the process. So what we've seen in other states is if they invest in solar. So one of the best example that I could use is a school district in Arkansas. A school district in Arkansas decided to make significant investments in solar panels in their district. Their district had been running a significant deficit for some years. The savings that school district made off of their utility bill gave them a significant surplus for the first time they were able to give all of their teachers a raise. So this is not simply just about energy consumption. This is also about the budgets of local governments and of households and schools, that when we use alternative resources that provide a cheaper alternative, you actually benefit everybody, and we can make significant investments. And so if we want to talk about, I like to say, energy policy is economic policy. And that example in Arkansas shows how being smart with energy and using a virtual system of a power plant and producing that energy from solar panels provided significant resources for all of their teachers by giving them a raise.
You mentioned earlier the comparison between Louisiana and Florida during the hurricane. What specifically should NPD be doing to harden its system? So it's not a matter of how quickly it comes back up, but how you avoid going down to start with.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, and these are some of the things that we also have a grid docket that is open up now, looking at making rules on maintenance for the grid. I think some of the things that we have seen that worked in Florida was significantly moving from wooden poles to steel poles. It is significantly stronger. It doesn't pull down the equipment as hard, especially with the wind. There were significant investments that they made in renewable energy resources. So what we saw is that there was battery storage. There was to keep power from those solar panels that had been stored to give them that adequacy, using microgrids with the battery to be able to pump the grid back up. And then there's also been burying the lines underground. It is something that should be talked about. And now, to be fair, it is costly. There is no doubt about it. But what we should be thinking about is how do we make that transition rather than every time something happens saying it's too costly to do. Maybe we should start a phase-in process. But I don't think these are the questions the Commission has really asked a company like Entergy, that we need to be significantly asking them in their integrated resource planning documents, or in their rate cases, or even in our rules. How do you make these investments? How do you plan to transition, and how do you plan to build a system that is more resilient, rather than just simply waiting for after the storm and then assessing what has happened? Yes, the Commission, for those who don't know, in 2017 changed our net metering rules. In kind of the easiest sense, you would basically get a direct credit for what you use. So if you used 1,000 kilowatts of energy, and your solar panel produced 400 of it, then you would only pay Entergy, or your utility, the remaining 600. In 2017, by a vote of 3-2, the Commission changed to what we call the buy all, save all. So now what the rule is, the energy company buys all of the energy that you've produced plus the energy that they've given you, and gives you a slight credit, around 3 cents on that kilowatt. And so I think it has slowed down our solar usage in this state, because it has been at the benefit of the utility company, because now they are actually making a lot more money off of energy that they're not producing. And I believe if you are producing that energy yourself, you should get the credit for every kilowatt hour that you have produced to give us resource adequacy. And so I think it is incumbent upon the Commission to refine and change its net metering rules. And my staff and my office have been looking at this. We've seen Mississippi do it recently on a very bipartisan basis that brought the utility companies, which was Entergy, as one of them, and the Commission together on rules that I think are very good. It's a model for us to use from a neighboring state. But when we're talking about the significant investments that will come down from the Inflation Reduction Act on solar, and if we are not capitalizing by making solar more affordable and utilizing it in the best way, then it's just not going to be sustainable for our future, and I think we need to change it. Julie, I saw your hand.
Yeah, can you give us an update on what's going on with the prison phone call rates? And also maybe explain, because I'm not sure everyone knows if you guys handle that.
Yes. Yes, so her question was, can I explain what is going on with prison phone call rates at the commission? So for most of you to know, the Louisiana Public Service Commission regulates phone call and for those who are incarcerated. We set the rates based off of inter and inner state. Right now, we debated this for a while. It's gotten very hotly contested, and I've pushed the issue. I issued that our staff give us a report on the status of where our rates stand in the nation right now, and that report was given out at our April meeting in Crowley. Recently, Congress passed the Martha Wright Reed Just Fair Communications Act, which significantly gave the FCC authority to regulate intra and interstate calls. So right now, when you think about a call out of state, the FCC has jurisdiction over that. And the FCC originally around, I want to say 2018, wanted to exert jurisdiction over intrastate phone calls. However, commissions across the country sued, and the circuit court said that Congress did not significantly give the FCC the right to regulate those calls. Since then, last year, Congress, in a unanimous bipartisan vote, gave the FCC significant authority over intra and interstate incarcerated phone calls. And so the FCC recently put out their solicitation for comments. Commissioner Campbell and myself sent in a letter of support for the FCC to regulate intra-state phone calls, because we know one of the most costly calls are state prisons. Those who are serving in Angola pay some of the highest rates in the nation for phone calls. When you think about this, the average phone call is about $7.50 for a week if you do the math correctly. The average income of someone who is incarcerated before they were incarcerated is around $20,000. When you calculate what it takes to talk to their family, a person who is incarcerated or their family would pay more than half of their yearly income just to communicate with their loved one. And we know one of the greatest ways to reduce recidivism is with human interaction. And I believe that's also a human right. And so we at the commission, with my partner, Commissioner Campbell, are looking at multiple options right now. We, as I said, we had the staff conduct a study, but we're also very hopeful that within the next year or two, the FCC will reduce and produce rules that will significantly lower the rates here in Louisiana. But it's a problem, and the Sheriff's Association has been fighting it every step of the way. They fought tooth and nail just to have me put a study on the agenda. Was controversy, and they started calling my colleagues about it. And so there was no plan. I had no initiative to lower rates at that time. I just wanted us to examine to see where Louisiana was, and they put on a complete assault, which tells me if we are making money off of people having connections with their family, and we are talking about reducing our prison population in the state of Louisiana, then we should get out of the business of overcharging them just to talk to their daughter or their mother or their spouse to ensure that they are safe. And we know that that has proven to work, that there are less controversies inside when they can communicate with the outside. So it's really baffling to me when I hear the Sheriff's Association go to the Capitol and say, we need all this stuff, and then they are stopping people from finding ways to get out to reduce our prison population. And so I'm going to continue to fight against this.
So, Davante, I want to be clear. You all don't just regulate the cost or rate of making a phone call in state prisons. You also do it for jails?
Yes.
Okay.
We have control over prisons and jails and their rates.
Earlier you mentioned CLECO and also you talked about Entergy. And those rural electric co-ops have been around for a long time. Is productive energy policy?
Yeah, so his question was about the competing factors, the investor-owned utilities that we have for electric, which would be SWEPCO, Entergy, and CLECO, but then we also have electric co-ops. So one of the interesting things about Louisiana is the electric co-ops in other states are not regulated by the commissions. They're typically regulated by local government. Here in Louisiana, it gives us the opportunity to look at electric co-ops and investor-owned utilities. Now, when you talk about the municipally owned utilities, like in Lafayette, those are outside of our regulation. But what we have is called the 300-foot rule. So when you're talking about a new development, for example, the provider who is providing electric services already within 300 feet has the first right of refusal. And so that's where you've started to see some competition, especially with the co-ops as developments have grown, as some of our historically rural parishes are becoming a little bit more suburban. You'll see that. I think one of the challenges we face in Louisiana is the municipal portions. I think, for instance, my constituents in New Orleans suffer significantly that they are regulated by the city council and not by the Public Service Commission. I think I saw a study that said if Entergy New Orleans would fall into Entergy Louisiana, New Orleanians would see their bills decrease by 25%. But we've also seen the challenges of when you don't have a system. There was a recent story about the city of Alexandria cutting off people's utility services during one of the hottest days this summer, but that's because the people of Alexandria are not protected by the PSC's rule on disconnections during extreme weather. And so how do you make the system better? I mean, I think that is a fight I'm not sure we want to take, but I do think we should have some ways. One of the challenges that we face significantly during natural disasters in this system is reporting. If we are not the main person, so when we are or the governor is trying to report to FEMA about situations, we have to rely on those municipalities to give us the information of their services. And that creates a significant challenge. When we talk about cost, it creates a challenge. And so I think that's where we're really struggling to do is how do we protect these systems that have existed, but are they the best systems for our people?
Last question. Go ahead.
Does the PSC have the power to revoke any of its rulings that have proven to be uneconomic or adverse to the public interest?
So we do not have, as I mentioned earlier, we do not have the authority to come back and say, well, this wasn't right. Now Entergy, you have to lower everybody's bills. However, we do have what's called prudence checks, and then we have. So, for instance, when we think about Grand Gulf Coast and the Siri cases, the commission is suing Entergy right now for what we think was lack of productivity. We are also looking at that at Dole Hills for CLECO. And so if they did not produce what was promised in that regulatory compact, the commission in a unanimous state, in my at least 8 months, has taken that. However, I am looking that we do that even stronger, especially with the pending rate cases from CLECO and a potential rate case from Entergy, significantly looking at everything that they're doing and whether or not that rate makes sense for the consumers and protecting them. Because I really feel we're at a crossroads in this state and in this nation with people's ability to pay for their electric services and also their willingness to pay for their electric services. And that creates a significant problem if we don't address it.
All right, I think that's where we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.